made an $80 million arms deal with countries who were part of the Soviet bloc. In a panic, the U.S. and its allies hoped that their generosity would dissuade Egypt from further deals with the Soviets. However, they were not, and they immediately negotiated arms deals 3 times the size of the original one. Egypt had also recognized Red China, and Nasser's regime entertained and hosted foreign dignitaries from the Soviet sphere. While Egypt was still evaluating the West's offer to finance the project, they publicly iterated that the Russians were prepared to offer financing on more favorable terms. This was an apparent bid to obtain better terms from the West. As a result of these actions, the United States ended up withdrawing its offer to finance the project. Officially, the U.S. position was that they retracted their offer because Egypt had failed to secure the water rights that were necessary to obtain the funding from the World Bank. Unofficially, however, the offer was withdrawn because of Egypt's continued dealings with the Soviet bloc. As a result of the withdrawal, Nasser had to seek other means of procuring funds for construction. 1 week after the offer expired, Nasser nationalized the Suez Canal, which was owned by a French-based company whose main stockholders were British, Egypt's ex-colonial masters. The $90 million yearly income that was produced by the canal would be allocated for the construction of the high dam at Aswan. The nationalization of the canal led directly to an invasion of the Sinai in 1956 by elements of the French, British, and Israeli armies. It was only the threat posed by the Soviet Union that led to a peace between the warring parties. The crisis created an element of lasting trust between the Egyptians and the Soviets. According to Soviet Premier Khrushchev, it showed Nasser who his real friends and enemies were. In negotiating a final deal on the High Dam project, the Soviets had to consider what return they could expect on their substantial capital investment. An agreement was reached in which the Soviets would be compensated in regular deliveries of cotton, rice, and other goods. As it was for the U.S., the Soviet interest in the project was based more on the political than on the economic. By building the dam, they would not just be winning the trust of the Egyptians, but they would also be winning the goodwill of other third world countries in the Middle East and Africa. The Soviets wanted to be viewed as allies to any country that wanted to rid itself of colonialism. They saw this as the key to strengthening Arab countries, which in turn would undermine the power of their enemies. In the treaty which completed the agreement between the Soviets and Egypt, it was stipulated that the Soviets would provide all necessary technical expertise, equipment, plans, and maintenance facilities, but that the Egyptians handle all project management, as well as supply all the labor. The Soviets reviewed all the plans provided by the Western engineers, but also made modifications that made the dam more efficient. The agreement reached on the dam also led to the construction of a steel mill and a pharmaceutical factory. The High Dam was completed in 1970, and finally the dream of harnessing the immense power of the Nile was made a reality. Modern Egypt is as dependent on the waters of the Nile today as they were at the time that the High Dam was built. The dam itself stands as a monument as much as the pyramids of Giza. However, the dam stands more as a monument to the law of unintended consequences. As a result of the dam's construction, flooding that used to occur on the lower Nile has been all but eliminated. Silt from the river that used to be deposited on farmlands along the lower Nile now simply build up in Lake Nasser. The farmlands on the lower Nile have become dependent on fertilizers to supplement the soil for growing. Runoff from the fields is now responsible for killing fish and shrimp in Egypt and the Mediterranean. The dam was expected to produce electricity for the development of industry in Egypt, but as a result it has produced too much, making electrical power a cheap commodity. Irrigation, which was once achieved by labor-intensive methods, have been replaced with pumps driven by cheap electrical power. These pumps have caused over-irrigation because farmers pump too much water into their fields, and the excess drains off into the canal system that feeds into the river. Microorganisms such as flatworms are washed out of the fields and into the canals, creating a health hazard for both animals and people. This wasn't a problem prior to the dam's construction, when the canals ran dry during certain parts of the year, but it is a problem now that canals remain wet year-round. Since its construction, the High Dam has served as a marvel of Third World engineering. It is a skillfully designed and well-built structure by any standards. The battle between the Soviets and the United States for influence in Egypt and the Middle East was dictated by who aided Egypt in the construction of the Aswan High Dam. The consequences of a Soviet victory are clear. The U.S. could have gained an ally at a time when they desperately needed allies in that region. Instead, the Soviets were able to influence Egyptian politics and economics for many years.